Hola, buen dia. It's me, Peppermint. And when I'm not on RuPaul's Drag Race or simply being New York City's sweetest diva, I'm tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from our good old friends at the BRCSJ Virtual HQ via their Facebook page. Tune in tonight.
Need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast, good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in those in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 my friends. Welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters, the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert Martin Seda Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here at the center, and your host for this evening, as I have been for the past almost 2 years now. Over 500 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed, my friends. Welcome to this one. Welcome to virtual community on the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to this wonderful rebroadcast that we are so thrilled to host, my friends. You're in for a treat. This is something special. So please enjoy the conversation tonight. Enjoy the Power Hour tonight. And coming up on the show, as I said at the outset, we are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific every single freaking weeknight. So please do be with us. But we also want to join together again in real community, in person, when safety and sanity allows. As many of you know, we lost our space during the pandemic. We lost our home. We lost our headquarters. We're looking to gather together again. So please, if you're so moved by tonight's episode of the Power Hour, if you're so inspired by the mission and vision of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice in general, what we do and how we do it with style, please help us to gather together again in community in 2022, make it a bigger and brighter year for our community. Please donate if you can, whatever is within your means and within your hearts. But enough from me. Let's get to the show tonight. Let's get to this inspirational conversation, and let's celebrate community, virtual and otherwise. Much love and respect, y'all. I'll catch you on the flip side to say goodnight. But until then, enjoy the show, y'all. And that Grace is coming on right now, so let's do the do. Nate Powell began self-publishing when he was 14 years old and has never stopped, can't stop, won't stop, illustrating and writing several books, becoming the first and only cartoonist ever to win the National Book Award. He is the creator of the brand new graphic memoir essay, Save It for Later, as well as artist for the March trilogy about civil rights icon John Lewis, among many other wonderful books and graphic novels. Nate has also received a Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, 3 Eisner Awards, 2 Ignatz Awards, a Coretta Scott King Author Award, 4 Yalta Great Graphic Novels for Teen Selections, and is a 2-time finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Along the way, appearing on the Rachel Maddow Show, CNN, PBS, and a little place called the UN. He has received so much more, and we're so thrilled to have him here. As Nate his own self says, quote, "I love trying to forge a contract between creator and audience in which we're able to meet halfway, each injecting a part of our own experiences into a story that's being told," end quote. So tonight we look forward to some of that inspirational injection. So please join me in welcoming Nate Powell to our Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour. Nate, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So thrilled. Love your studio. Love your setup. It's the perfect moment to be with you. I see the vinyl and the long boxes and the drawing table. You and I are too simpatico, and I fear that we could go down too many rabbit holes tonight and entertain each other and leave behind the audience. So let's be careful. Let's be careful out there, right? So tell me, you have had an incredible career thus far. And it must feel really good to be able to make a difference using your inky fingers. Are you able to appreciate all that you've done thus far?
Yes. I mean, am I able to appreciate? I guess that's the fine line. I work at a pretty fast clip, and so there's not a lot of looking back sometimes. That's really where the reality of being like a full-time cartoonist has resulted in kind of having to balance my ability to look back at what I've done. This is where I'm really thankful for any chance to like talk about my work and its context with the world that we all share, because these are those moments to reflect on the work in the larger sense. But yeah, it's, I've wanted to draw comics since right around my 12th birthday. And it was really one of those moments where I always drew and I always read comics from the time I was 3 years old. But I never put two and two together that could be a possibility for me. And it took a friend of mine who was drawing comics to just suggest it. And he was like, we need to make comics. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, we do need to make comics. And I've just never looked back since, 31 years ago.
So I hear rumor that you actually graduated from School of Visual Arts.
I did, yeah.
I think you're the first person I've ever met in the entire world that actually graduated. Everybody I know went there for a couple of years and then went somewhere else, myself included.
Right on. Well, to be fair, I did graduate, but I did not attend graduation. So maybe that helps even the playing field a bit.
So I'm not going to ask when you were there because I don't want to give away, any of your personal information you don't want to share. But we must have gone for the same reason: the cartooning comic book major, the fact that there was such a strong platform for folks like us to have our voices heard, and and the great teachers who were there at the time that I was there, Harvey Kurtzman and Sarah. I can't remember her last name. I feel awful. But all these great comic creators were teaching there and still are. Like Phil Jimenez, who's on the show later on in the month, is teaching there. And Steve Brodner, who's a friend of the show, comes on once a month, teaches there. So there's wonderful folks who have taught there and continue to teach there. Was that a pivotal moment for you? Was that somewhere that you found yourself able to gestate even further your talents?
I had an interesting relationship to art school in that ever since the beginning of 9th grade in high school, I had been self-publishing comics, and had been, self-publishing zines, tapes, records. The DIY bug hit me really early as like a 13-year-old getting into underground punk back in my home state of Arkansas. So I learned a wealth of technical and formal information, and I really appreciated the way that my comics studies, overlapped with other classes I had to take. It allowed me to sort of like, perceive, see, and draw in new ways. It acclimated me to using a lot of professional tools that in pre-internet Arkansas, like I was virtually clueless about. But thankfully, I went to school. I arrived at school with this very strong do-it-yourself ethic. And so I spent most of my classwork like trying to fit assignments so that they would, so there'd be something usable that I was already working on in a comic book story. I knew that a lot of time was going into the work, and I kind of didn't want to waste it. So I was like, well, I've got this zine coming out. I need to make sure my assignments are usable for my own thing. So it was a unique relationship. I made a lot of friends who are still peers in the comics world. I didn't hang out as much as maybe I should have. So I'll catch up with people a lot over the years and realize that, be like, oh, we had like 3 classes together. Why didn't we ever hang out? and be like, well, I guess I just thought I was like slightly too cool because my head was, buried in the thing I was already doing. And I wasn't quite looking around as much as I should have while I was there.
I enjoyed my time there. I have to say that, and I don't want to go off on one of those rabbit holes. I know that you and I, it'll be dangerous to avoid this whole conversation, this whole hour. But when I went there, the dorms were on 34th and 9th. And for those viewers at home who don't know where that is Hell's Kitchen. That is Hell's Kitchen without Daredevil there protecting folks. And we had 2 rooms that are where we slept was basically like a 2-foot by 4-foot room. And then there was a second room that was our studio. It was actually larger than our sleeping area. It was pretty horrendous, but it was such an incredible, I'm trying to think of the right word, collective of artists. I met Sam Henderson there, who I work. Do you know Sam at all?
Yeah.
You know his work?
And I know his stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so Sam, for those of you who don't know, is one of the king of the zine world, right? Like he is just someone who was, and I was proud to be in one of his first. Tuna Casserole was the name of it. And now he went on to work on SpongeBob SquarePants, and it was a great laboratory for us to find our ideas. And what I want to ask you this: was it always important to you that your work mirrored your beliefs? Was that always something that was essential to you from the get-go?
In general, yes. And I've been thinking about this a lot more because most of the time, I mean, for the last decade or 12 years or so, I do a lot of bouncing back and forth between writing and drawing my own fiction work and then usually working with other writers to do nonfiction. And I just published my own nonfiction work and have gone back to fiction. And a lot of the questions are now that I feel like I have slightly better chops with, propelling a concrete plot and developing characters. And like you get in these relationships with characters and what's going on. And then the question always returns about how much of yourself you want to inject into them, how much of your own priorities and worldview. Yes, I think that the overarching sense through my life is that comics, like making zines throughout my life, has been an avenue by which to simply express what is important to me. And definitely, like, as a self-righteous teenager and 20-something, there was a lot more, I don't know, anthemic, dogmatic positioning in my work. But at the same time, I wasn't as confident enough as a person. And so I would then try to bury it in a lot of nonsense or dreaminess. These are elements of stories that I still love, but it's been a kind of a slow crawl back to find a nice balance where I'm really expressing something that's at the core of who I am, yet allowing not just fictional characters, but allow their arcs and their lives to kind of make their own choices eventually as they develop and grow on the page. It's a weird relationship, but it's one that I really value.
So was it a matter of finding your artistic voice as well as finding your confidence in incorporating more difficult matter in your work? And what I mean is, your art, if you want it to be a career, is a commodity of sorts. So you always have to walk that fine line, find that balance between what you're selling to folks and what you believe in and what you think they might swallow in between.
That is true. The counterpoint to that, which is very reassuring in comics land, is that, like in the world of publishing, comics is a pretty small pond. And, the March trilogy is an extremely successful book in terms of sales and in terms of its influence and hopeful continued influence on society. Outside of March, what's amazing about doing comics is that is that it's such a small pond that you can take some kind of big risks, creative risks, or in terms of taking a chance on making a statement that's meaningful but chancy, or cranking out fiction that can tread a line. Basically, you can try stuff, and if it works, nobody's going to really care that much. But if it doesn't work and it bombs, still nobody really cares. So it takes a lot of the pressure off. Like when you're selling 5 or 10 or 15,000 copies of a book, as compared to like 300,000 copies of a book, it's kind of nice. Like the world of making comics, and particularly making graphic novels, it's a nice playground. It's like, it's a good middle ground where you're able, like, these are works which will last. You're able to express yourself with a lot of freedom, but the stakes are fairly low. And even in terms of making comics, I make all my stuff physically on paper with ink and ink washes. It certainly takes time, but if you need to redo something, you just redo it. Like the stakes are so low, it's so accessible. In that way, I think it is the most democratic mass medium in terms of anyone being able to express something that's important to them using a minimal amount of money and resources.
But if you do want to cross that line into being hugely successful, into having the life you want to have, and doing it as an artist, there has to be some consideration of raising those stakes, of those risks becoming higher, and
Yes.
grow an audience. You have now, From March, which, is a beautiful book. Here's just one panel, one page, that you worked with Andrew Aiden, who's also been on the show, who, we've had wonderful conversations about. And by the way, for you folks at home, just right quick, the final chapter is coming out finally in August run, which I know you had a smaller part in it. We'll talk about that in a moment. The book we're going to talk about most tonight, and we'll get to this, is this one, Save It for Later, Promises, Parenthood, and the Urgency of Protest. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But I do want to ask you this, and I've been kind of leading up to it a bit, and I want to talk about the elephant in the room, or in this case, the two white guys in the room, and how you and I are talking about these subjects of race. And it's another difficult day. We had the soldier who was attacked over the weekend by police, I believe it was Virginia, and then we had the young man who was killed just last night. And it's not stopping. And do you find, or I guess my direct question is this, and it's a difficult question, and I hope you don't mind me asking. When you were approached to do March, did you feel, as a person, as a person of privilege, did you feel like it was your place to do it? Did you have a moment of hesitation? Did you consider what other options there may be?
Well, early on, that was its own process. I was initially, I read the press release for March, and I'd been working with my publisher for 5 or 6 years prior to that. So I was just used to checking their website. I caught the press release. I was like, what an excellent idea for a book. I didn't put 2 and 2 together that the lack of an artist listed on the press release meant that there was no artist yet. So I kind of forgot about it. Thankfully, my publisher called me a couple weeks later to personally recommend that I try out for the role of artist. And beyond his connecting me with Congressman Lewis and Andrew, it really fell into the same kind of arrangement of any other collaboration I've ever done with a book. It was between the creators of the book to determine, what was going to go down. So I did a couple of demo pages. I got notes back from each of them and redid the pages. After about 2 weeks, we just clicked really strongly and decided to push forward. Now, my publisher had his own reasons for thinking I was a good choice. One of those reasons was simply my being a Southerner. I'm from Arkansas. I also lived in Alabama, in Montgomery during elementary school. My parents are Mississippian baby boomers. And a lot of it had to do with having an entry-level familiarity, not just with the history and context, but having personal first-person experiences with a lot of the world that was going to be drawn throughout the March trilogy. A lot of these places I had been to, I had lived, I was familiar with a lot of details that wouldn't require extra research. Another one of his considerations was I don't miss deadlines. I was reliable and I could bridge a gap between realistic and representational artwork and enough cartooniness and flow to really embed historic characters on the page with a sense of humanity and agency. But yeah, once we decided to work together, that being Congressman Lewis and Andrew's, decision, there's naturally the wave of self-questioning, anxiety about what that means for me, being the white boy artist to tell John Lewis's story of his life as a young person at the center of the civil rights movement, but also to tell the story of the larger movement itself, covering like 7 years. To make that long story short, virtually all that anxiety went away and became much more clear once I, number one, fundamentally accepted that Congressman Lewis chose me to tell his story. When I'm telling the story of March on the page, I'm telling the story of the movement through his eyes and in his words. And I that's phrasing that sounds like it's, part of if you'd read like a one sheet about a book, but that's literally what it is. I'm telling this story through his eyes and in his words. And ultimately, it is not about me. Now, going attendant to that point, the fact that it's not about me, the fact that I'm doing my job, is that it should be quite understandable to get pushback and get questions about who I am and what I'm doing, making the artwork and making the pages of March. And really, again, making it not about you means welcoming those questions and welcoming those doubts. And the best way I could find really to respond was by trying to draw the hell out of that book and trying to let my work telling John Lewis's story speak for itself. And I found that kind of, in terms of my being able to do my job at the desk, that is what I had to circle back around to. That was always the answer, was putting it back into the work. I drew it on and off for 4.5 years though. And so oftentimes, you'd have to circle around, kind of like recenter yourself and remember, I've got a job to do. This isn't about me. So that's where I rest. And Congressman Lewis always did a really good job kind of helping spread some of the spotlight and spread all the credit equally amongst us. And he's a person who loved fine art very much and was really moved by the storytelling. And he had a very sincere interest in having Andrew and I speak about our work with him in terms of turning his experiences and turning this documentation of the movement into, a work of art and a work of mass media. And so I really appreciate him standing up time and time again and doing the footwork, to kind of round the whole situation out.
I love two things you said. I just want to pull at two threads. I love the fact that John Lewis chose you, and that's what made it right for you. And I think that's so powerful. And I also really dig what you said about putting yourself into the work. And it was about putting yourself into the work, but taking yourself out of the equation. So you found that perfect balance. I want to throw every piece of myself onto the page into the ink I'm putting forth, but I'm not going to be part of what the book is about. And I can't imagine, honestly, and I don't ever talk shit in this show, but I can't imagine anyone else putting forth that book and making March what it was other than you. The way that you communicated all of it, it was obvious that you and Andrew had a connection, you know, in the pieces that were about him and the pieces that were his story. But even more so, you can see that John Lewis and yourself, you had a platform where you understood who he was and could communicate what he went through if it wasn't even part of your experience personally.
Well, and that's part of that is the power and the magic of comics. I mean, it's like one reason why I love comics so much is that comics have changed my life again and again and again throughout my life. Like I gained a social conscience in large part thanks to Chris Claremont's X-Men run from the mid 70s to the early 90s. That's like, as a 12-year-old, that is what that's what allowed me to see and process like racism, sexism, homophobia, nationalism, xenophobia in the world around me as my worldview was rapidly expanding. And so along the way, especially doing the March trilogy, you know, comics we're always like at the kids' table of literature and publishing. So we have to do a lot of like fighting to continually legitimize ourselves. But for a lot of that defaults to kind of discounting the power and the impact of more traditional comics, you know, like trying to like really clearly separate what a graphic novel is from a superhero adventure comic. But to me, I started realizing it was more and more important to stick up for the at times revolutionary power of some of those superhero comics to sort of get a lot of people on a path to see their world through new eyes and to sort of change what they feel may be possible to do in relation to that world.
I love that you raised the name of Chris Claremont. So that is someone who does not get enough respect, both in the field and especially in the greater community. I mean, as you said, that run of X-Men, not only being workman, like he was just at it, you know, for literally decades, but it was so important to so many marginalized communities. The queer community relates so much to the X-Men and what it was about being an outcast and being, you know, loving the world that hated you and protecting the folks that wanted you dead. And there was so much to grasp onto there. So thank you for another name that deserves amplification. Claremont. People should definitely go out and seek some of that work out. Just brilliant stuff. But your journey, so you get to do March, and you must be the happiest camper in the world because you're now in a room with John Lewis, and you're getting to tell this story, and you're getting to work on this, and what a brilliant 4.5 years it must have been to do that work. But you must have also at the same time, I feel it because I see it in Save It for Later, that you must have been chomping at the bit to tell your own story, to say this is what I want to, because you said yourself just, you know, a few minutes back, you said you took yourself out of March. You couldn't be part of that, but you have so much to say and so much to share. And how much of it was bursting, and were you able to work on Save It for Later or the nascent ideas of what that was going to be during that time? And when you were done, were you able to pull it all forth and make it into your own universe?
Yeah, the chronology is interesting in terms of what I was getting out of comics and putting into comics I was making. For the March trilogy, yes, there's a big part of, you know, presence and ego that you need to check at the curb. But there were these other moments where I was able to inject a strong sense of self in much more invisible and subtle ways. And a lot of that had to do with whenever possible, if there was a physical location that I knew, that I had been to. Something like, these are the things that no reader should notice or would have any way of knowing. But like, for example, in March Book 2, at the beginning, as the Freedom Rides approach the city of Montgomery, I remember in Andrew's script, he mentions coming over like the last tiny hill with Montgomery approaching a few miles in the distance. And when I read that back in like 2014 or 2013, I was like, I know that hill because that's the first hill of the Appalachian Mountains. And it's like 50 feet or something. But I remember being a child and driving north through Birmingham to Mississippi, to northern Mississippi, and my parents pointing out that this was the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains. And I was like, I have vivid memories of this one line in a script, which is only in existence to describe the scene to me. And I remember writing Andrew back to be like, believe it or not, I'm having big feelings about this tiny hill, and I'm going to draw the hell out of this hill. So I was writing and drawing my own fiction work while I was doing the March trilogy. And a lot of that I was sort of putting on the back burner because the responsibilities, but also the scope and scale of doing March were increasing and changing day by day. Also, the social and political climate of the United States was shifting so quickly, really just explicitly shifting rightward as our work between 2012 and 2016 continued for March. And so it was requiring more energy, more evaluation of what we were doing and why. And so, frankly, like, Save It for Later is nonfiction. It's a hybrid of memoir and essays. But by the time the drawing table was clear, like, I really had no interest in doing a memoir or an autobiographical comic. And I was very happy just collaborating with other writers and doing my own weirdo fiction. Then throughout 2017, as we're all adjusting to 100 dumpster fires burning at once, and we're all scrambling to react to these moments as we should, by the end of 2017, like the main impetus for Save It for Later was simply that things were moving so quickly, and we were forced in this authoritarian power grab to be in a situation in which we were always reacting to a situation instead of, this is like a brilliant authoritarian, tactic or strategy, is sort of taking away our ability to, create and move and build on things when you're always in a reactionary standpoint. But importantly, I was like, things are happening so quickly, like everyone's scared, anxious, angry, sad. But most people I know, myself included, feel like there's not enough bandwidth to kind of air that to anyone who's outside of your closest inner circle of friends or your family members, if that. And I would catch myself time and time again being like, who cares? This is not the time. When the next thing I knew, a year had passed under this regime, and people still were not carving out the space just to say things like, this is fucked up. I'm scared. Like, I'm so anxious. I can't sleep. Like, I saw his face in my dreams last night, and the implications this mean, or my child saw his face in their dreams last night. And these are things that are broadly shared by a significant majority of Americans. And I even mean like rational, sane, conservative Americans who especially feel like who were not happy before they got normalized into this authoritarian regime. But there's a level of anxiety and fear and discontent even within, the center right population of American adults that was just getting shoved right back down. So initially I was like, there are so many things that happened between my children and my wife and I, these little moments, and especially preparing my kids, as 4 to 8 year olds, to have what they need to be equipped to tackle this madness and this nonsense, but also to understand where I fail at doing that. I was like, I think it's time to actually go into nonfiction mode. And I wanted to make a nice, slim, raw, quick 96-page book. And I wanted it to be out in like 6 months and just kind of enter it into the conversation. But, for a cartoonist, this is where you work out your issues. Like, comics are therapy too. So the more I was working on those kind of memoir pieces, that's where the world starts to creep in too. And you realize that you can bounce back and forth between something more subjective and objective and make something more powerful, more relevant, more worldly. So I spent 2 extra years on it and wound up with what I have.
So what happened was it became as exponential as it was inspirational.
Yes.
And what's amazing to me is I don't think folks understand, especially with graphic novels and comics, how much work and time it takes to create. So this came out and it blew up and people were like, oh, it's so of the moment. It's so wonderful. You captured, but you've actually been working on it, as you just said, for about 4 years. So it's 4 years in gestation, but it seems like it was just hot off the ink isn't dry, but that's not the case at all.
Go ahead.
No, please.
This is a really tricky spot for Save It for Later to be in. It's divided up into 7 chapters, and each one's kind of an interwoven essay that relates to the others. But especially when there is such a quick sequence of events during the previous administration, in a very blatant, attempt at a breakdown of democracy and a breakdown of a shared society. Things are happening so fast, and especially, with comics, like the slowest yet, most accessible one-person mass media to become involved in. Early on, I was trying to burn through pages as quickly as I could, and I outlined and even kind of like sketched out the first 2 or 3 chapters within a day or two. And I was like, oh, I've got this. But then, reality is always right there for you. And you start asking yourself questions. How much to update the things you've already finished? How much a statement becomes obsolete once 6 months or a year or 2 years pass? And my conclusion was there's no, especially in the last year of doing the book, when that was the only thing I was working on, I realized that at each point, if this book comes out tomorrow, it won't be soon enough. And enough things are happening that it's always going to be, something is always going to be out of date, or there's something that needs to be adjusted. And because, this is my experience and my family's experience, but the reason why it's a book is because, I'm not special. Who cares about what my family and I have, had to talk about or whatever? It's the fact that a significant majority of American families have had experiences, discussions, fears, anxieties, very similar to what I've documented. And a lot of it is not trying to be a parenting guide, not thinking I'm qualified for that, but sort of showing the successes and failures, what did and didn't work for me and for my kids, to recognize that we are all, figuring out how to find our way through this and how to equip our kids for their foreboding future. But also, I basically decided to date the end of each chapter, recognizing that anything could happen at any point, which would put, any statement throughout the book or any conclusion or any observation at jeopardy of seeming immediately obsolete. So that was one of these moments where you expose your limitations. I dated each chapter to be very explicit about this crystallizes my thoughts or my position, my doubts at this date. And I finished work on it at the end of August in 2020. And let me tell you, it's pretty weird to be in a situation where you're like, I just don't know if democracy is going to survive. I don't know what's going to happen. And trying to make a statement in a book that remains relevant regardless of the electoral outcome that happened last November. I think I succeeded at making a statement that reflects who I am and what I value. And I think it did endure. But it was a really weird situation to be like, okay, do I need to make two different endings to this book? The ultimate answer being like, if you're going to have to change the book that much about these pressing concerns based on the electoral result, then you've got a bigger problem with the book. So I just tried to focus on making the message and the content in the book consistent enough that it would survive even the most terrible of outcomes.
I mean, it's fascinating to me that you have this modesty about what you've created, which is very much so a great guide to parenting during this time of protest. And you know, I wish that you understood how successful you were. But I also find that modesty to be coupled with the incredible ballsy move of you saying, in August, I'm done. And not saying, okay, I traveled this journey for this long. Let me wait a couple of months and see what happens so I know exactly what my ending should be. I mean, it's pretty brave to say, you know what? Democracy is going to survive or not, but I'm putting this out there, and it's going to be meaningful because it was of this moment. So, you know, as a prior guest, Michael Penn, when he came on this show, he's a musician, and he said, you know, I'm not sure if we can talk for an hour because talking about music is like dancing to architecture, you know, that old quote. And I feel like talking about art is like dancing to architecture as well. So do you mind, let's look at some of the work. And by the way, folks at home, Chris, our dedicated volunteer, thank you, Chris, for all the work you do for us, is in the comment section giving you links to all of Nate's social media, but also how you can buy the book. And as you see this book and we talk about it in earnest, you're going to want this book. And it's right there on bookshop.org. The link is right there in the comments. You can click on it without leaving the conversation, without missing a word of our inspirational chat. But go buy this book. It's pretty phenomenal. And I'm not going to sell it to you because now the book is going to sell itself easily. So this is the book, Save It for Later, Promises, Parenthood, and the Urgency of Protest. And let's just walk through it a bit and see where we go. Just give us, you know, if you have any random thoughts about or, you know, direct ideas that you want to share. But we have about 24 pages that we can look at just so folks can see what we're inspired by.
Well, this page is set on the day of the first Women's March in January 2017. My wife went with some of her friends. We live in southern Indiana, so they drove to DC for the event. I was on daddy duty. So important. It's important to recognize the context for, in particular, my older daughter, who's 9 now. I signed the contract to do the March trilogy like the week she was born. So literally her entire life has been surrounded by images of nonviolent protest, images of revolution, images of John Lewis. And around the time she turned 4, that's when she personally requested to start reading March Book 1 together, like at book time. So it's been very interesting. Like once we're in a real authoritarian power grab, and we've got this fresh 5-year-old up in the mix, and an almost 2-year-old. From what my 5-year-old had learned at that point about the urgency of finding solutions to problems and learning to participate under your own power, we were watching on TV, watching the huge march that was in DC. And there wasn't a march in my nominally progressive college town that day. There was one up the road in Indianapolis, but nothing was going on in my town. And so my daughter was looking, and automatically, you know, she's like, "Can we have a march?" And I was like, "Of course. You mean like on the sidewalk in our neighborhood, right? Because you're 5." And she just gave me like the ice stare. And she was like, no, Daddy. I mean, downtown by the courthouse where we've done other assemblies and protests. And I was like, oh, get your shoes. We are going. So the three of us spent an hour marching around downtown, and under their own, I kept them off the streets, kept them on the sidewalk. I was still dadding it up, but they came up with their own slogans that were relevant to our situation in the United States and relevant to the Women's March. But it was in their context. Importantly, like for a 5-year-old, her entry into protest, into movements for people's rights, for equality, into the civil rights movement, had to do with recognizing fairness and injustice, recognizing bullies and how bullies with power use power to keep things unfair, and recognizing the work that people can do under their own power to push against that. And so it was just a profound thing. And it was cute, but I also try to emphasize, like, when your kids get this idea, they really mean that shit. And so you need to listen to them. And if they want to go march, you need to go make it happen and stop thinking about people laughing at you, because they're going to laugh at you. Now, our downtown was pretty dead on that day. But the point is that there was no women's march that was in Bloomington that day. And yet my older daughter founded it at age 5. And there were 3 people involved. And that is very real to her. And that is the kind of thing that stays with you for the rest of your life when you're 5 and you're like, oh, well, this is like a no-brainer. Let's go have a protest. So then the next week is when there was an enormous, probably 3,000 to 5,000 person protest here downtown at the same location against the first Muslim ban. And throughout the previous engagements that my daughter had at protests, she was always kind of dissatisfied because she was like, why is no one marching? Especially growing up reading March with Dad and learning about the history of the civil rights movement. So this is one of these times where I was like, now you are about to march, my child. And so we headed down, we occupied City Hall. And as we were, cramming in there with hundreds of strangers who are neighbors, then there's the understandable dad reaction where you're like, shit could go sour. You're like, I'm gonna keep it cool, but I'm probably gonna change the channel here in another few minutes. So after about half an hour or so, participating with everyone, being like, you want to go get a hamburger or whatever, and a lot of these moments that are captured and Save It for Later have to do with recognizing how to do the most good or impart the most on your kid without scaring them or overloading them with information, giving them something that they can take away and build on.
There's so much in your work and in your viewpoint that is about balance. And is that something that you have worked on? And I would say your entire freaking life, really, without overstating it. The balance in your work, in your politics, in your art, the balance in your family between what's going to be impactful and what's going to cross over into perhaps being harmful or dangerous. And how, and as a parent myself, and being at the protests and also raising our son the same way and having that conversation often, a little bit of harm is good. A little bit of danger is good, because it shows that the world can be ugly. And then you have to make sure that your children know how to shield themselves from that, but also embrace it as part of the wonderful nature of the world. Because without the ugliness, you can't embrace the beauty.
Certainly. And I mean, kids are going to pick up on that stuff anyway. Like, a lot of it is recognizing that there is a limit to what you can, to the multiple aspects of anything you can shield your kid from. Like, they're just going to pick up on stuff anyway. And so if they're going to anyway, it's important to kind of meet them there. In terms of balance, I think I put so much of my life prior to Parenthood into really like I'm living my punk dreams or living my comics dreams and really investing so much of my life, my sense of social balance and connection, all tied into these creative endeavors and these creative communities. A lot of that goes away when you're a parent because there's just not enough space. And so you spend time trying to get little bits of that back, year by year. And I think that trying to find that balance sort of was pushed to its maximum towards the end of the March trilogy. I mean, frankly, it's like, as perhaps Andrew might have told you, like, it was a very intense experience that really took over every aspect of life, particularly like the time crunch, the content and context crunch for doing book 3 in 2016. And so since finishing March book 3 in 2016, a lot of my headspace has been dedicated to basically just doing what I know I'm supposed to do and finding balance so that I won't fall dead of a heart attack when I'm 55, and making sure that my wife and my children like understand that dad has figured out how to handle stress in a more healthy way as time has gone by, and not to basically you don't want your kids to make the same mistakes you make. Historically, I'm bad at handling stress, and it just makes me anxious, and it makes me like get focused on other things I could be doing or whatever. So yeah, the older I get, the more I realize like this is the kind of stuff that's just going to kill you, as a middle-aged person or whatever. So yeah, it becomes a little more urgent when you're like, okay, once the virus hit, and this is also in Save It for Later. I don't think I sent you the page for this one, but like I had my first panic attack in many years, like on about day 10 of the COVID lockdown. And I was like, it's still there. It's been like as a response, as a stress response, it's still inside me. So a lot of it is just like exercising mindfulness and recognizing whether it's when you're feeling a certain way or recognizing symptoms and clues in the people around you and the people you care about. I've had to dedicate more and more time to that, certainly.
I mean, you've done it quite well, because when Andrew was on the show, he actually told us that he actually ended up in the hospital in that period as well, because it was so difficult. It seems like your family unit, and I don't mean to overstep here, I don't want to make any assumptions, but it seems like your wife too are wonderful sources of creating even more of that balance that you've been doing on your own all this time, and the book shows it. And then you have these moments here where you go back and you can see the difference, and I always get into process, and the art in this is so different than the previous page. You can see that there's this airiness and this brightness and this openness, and then you go into this moment, which is a very different moment for you, and it all seems to just envelop into itself.
You bet. I mean, that's the magic of comics, is being able to actually, I guess in essence, that's what expressionism is as a movement in art, but the ability to convey emotional states and subjective reality just using line, color, form, and how radically and how quickly you can change that on the pages of comics to express things that you basically can't express verbally in as convincing or immediate of a way. But yeah, like I'm very lucky that my wife is she's a social worker. She does mental health services work, and she's basically a child mentoring and parenting expert. And so I'm very lucky that I get to defer to her on all things big and small. And there's also a balance, however, in terms of like, there are a lot of like consent issues in depicting my family in this book, and which is one reason why like when my kids are depicted as unicorns and ponies and like various equestrians, a lot of it is just like giving them a little bit of a mask since they don't have agency really. And my wife keeps to herself a lot more. And so since we're a team and we we make a lot of mistakes together as we're hashing it out in Parenthood. In the pages of the book, it's all true, but with me as a character, that's where I think it's better and more fitting for me to be the one making the mistakes throughout the book by putting my character in the position of being the idiot or being the reactionary. I think it serves the book better, and I think it serves my family better as well.
So was there a conversation, as you pointed out, your children are presented in these equestrian unicorn personas. Was that a conversation you had with them? Did you ask them what they wanted to be perceived as? Was there a conversation about that?
No, I mean, at the time when I started working up the visuals, I did a couple of things where my older daughter was just her, and it just didn't feel wrong, but it wasn't what I wasn't feeling it. And at the time we were reading and watching a lot of My Little Pony, which, I mean, for the uninitiated, I'm no brony, but I will say that My Little Pony is pretty good. It's pretty good. So it grew on me enough, and I was like, yeah, I'm believing in this. And I was like, well, a lot of it is just the magical spirit of youth or whatever. But importantly, it's the fact that the adults are not depicted in the same kind of quasi-magical way with their inner light manifesting themselves as unicorns. So I think a lot of the subtext in this book is along the way, how many edges to our sensitivity and our vision of the world get whittled away, by the world we have to endure. And so whenever possible, most kids are depicted in this kind of anthropomorphic way. Some are not. And a lot of that is the transition to being whittled down by the world. But so it served multiple functions.
I cannot believe how quickly this hour has passed. I am shocked.
It's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock. We are in the after party now, Prince Be Proud. So we didn't get to even a quarter of the visuals we wanted to. But you know what? That just makes our folks out there who are viewing, now you want to buy the book because there's so much more to see. Nate Powell, Save It for Later, Promises, Parenthood, and the Urgency of Protest. This is a beautiful piece. Chris has put the link up in the comments section. Here it is again, bookshop.org. It supports your local bookshops, independent bookshops. We chose it, and please do. And March is there too. While you're there getting Saved for Later, get a copy of March because no library should be without it. Buy one for yourself, buy one for a friend, buy one for an enemy, you'll become a friend. Buy one for your local school. This is a book that every school should have. And finally, although we want everyone to buy a copy, also call your local library. This is very important.
That's right.
If they don't have a copy, you request as a patron they get one, because there are many folks who can't afford to buy books, and this is their conduit to great art and great messages like this. Thank you, my friend, for sharing your sense of balance, for sharing your sense of fairness, for helping us, those of us that are parents, either relate or find a guide for ourselves. And I want to thank you personally for holding your pencil the entire time you've been talking.
I had to take some notes, so
because I am the same way. I'll find myself and I'm like, that is such a very artisty thing to do, and I appreciated that as well. I have enjoyed this, and if the folks out there have enjoyed this even a fraction of how much I did, then they had a good conversation and a good community evening. So thank you, my friend, for being with us. Please do come back. It was really an honor and a privilege to have this conversation about your work, and it means a great deal.
You count on it. I really enjoyed my time here, so I would be happy.
All right, be well and best to your family. Go protest.
Thanks.
Go do the work.
We've all got to.
Be well.
Thanks.
So, my friends, that is Nate Powell, and this, again, is the book, Save It for Later, and I will say it now that he is off screen. I will say it. This is a book you want. This is a wonderful, tender, dangerous, just a beautiful piece of work. And it's personal, it's political, it's everything that we hope art should be. It's everything that I try to have the Power Hour to be, and it succeeds wholeheartedly. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Another extraordinary conversation in the Power Hour. Remember, we are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and we look forward to having you with us. Please do be with us, because we are here for you, but it means nothing if you're not here with us. What I tell you, what a wonderful, extraordinary, inspirational conversation. What virtual community we're building here on the Power Hour. I want to thank you all for being with us in virtual community. Please do support the center. This virtual community that we're building is so wonderful, extraordinary, inspirational, but please help us to be in community in person. It is so important for our community to gather together, to see each other, to recognize each other, respect each other, to love each other. So if you're so moved by the conversation tonight, if you are so inspired by the very mission of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice, our vision, what we want to do and how we want to do it with style, please do support the center. Please do support our community. Give whatever is within your means, within your hearts. Please allow us to gather together again in 2022. It's hard to be a safe space without a space, y'all. We look forward to seeing you here in the Power Hour every single freaking weeknight at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And we do hope to be together again in community as well. We look forward to seeing you. We look forward to seeing you. Until soon, much love and respect. Please be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And please, especially my friends, as always, be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.